I paid £14 for a slice of quiche. So I'm going to read you a story I could have given more thought to. Hi, this is Half-Baked Tales, where I write and read one halfway thought-through short story every week. They are not always good, and that is the point. I'm performing this week in We Are All Florida Man at the Edinburgh Fringe, so this episode will be short and sweet. Anyone living in Edinburgh knows the Fringe is an exhausting time whether you're performing or not. But next week, the curtain on the largest annual theatre festival falls, and Edinburgh locals can experience peace once again. Last week, I continued on with a story that weaves elements of the dancing plague folklore with 1930s American dance marathons. This week, wouldn't you know it, I'm continuing on with a part 3. This newest chapter is from a new character's perspective, so I do recommend going back and listening to Fiddling parts 1 and 2, just the past 2 podcasts, if you missed them. Otherwise, here's a little synopsis of what we've learned so far. The dance marathon is held monthly, and its star attraction is the fiddler. After hearing one note of the fiddler's tune, contestants dance uncontrollably till they die. Last person standing wins a sum of money so large it can pull a whole family out of poverty. 6-year-old Deli's father was the winner last month, so they finally can afford tickets to see the marathon not as contestants, but as audience members. Clad in noise-canceling headphones to keep the dangerous song of the fiddler out of their ears, the audience watches in delight as the less fortunate of their community vie for a chance at a better life. But this month, a secret plot is about to unfold. We just need to wait for the signal. Here's Half-Baked Tale number 43, Fiddling, Part 3. The signal would come from the third of the fiddler's attendants, the one stationed on the north side of the stage, with the best view of the broadcaster's recording booth. That attendant was named Ronald. From his vantage point, Ronald was able to keep his eyes trained on the booth without craning his neck or giving any hint of his intentions. He could monitor the fiddler while keeping the recording sign in his periphery. He and the other 3 attendants remained standing on stage for the duration of the marathon, a hard but necessary job. They were close enough to corral and lock the fiddler back in her box, but far enough to keep safe from her dangerous music. Ronald and his 3 companions were visible to the entire audience, stationed mere feet away from the poor dancers. Anyone sitting anywhere within the tent could see Ronald clearly, could keep an eye on him, just as he kept an eye on the recording sign. He was the perfect and only choice to deliver the signal. The plan was so intricate. It had only the smallest margin for success. Every detail had to be perfect. If anyone noticed a rogue audience member, dancer, or attendant with their attention diverted away from the fiddler and the marathon dancing, and instead towards the seemingly uninteresting recording booth, all could be lost. If the signal came from a plant within the crowd, it could easily be lost in the throng of audience members. If the signal came from a willing dancer, how could anyone tell the difference between the signal and one of the dancer's jolting, strange movements? Slight suspicion before the exact right moment could spell out complete failure for their plan. The smallest miscalculation could cause everything to go up in flames. After all they'd accomplished, how far they'd come, that wasn't an option. Sweat from Ronald's palm was pooling on his ring of keys. He always held it as the marathon progressed. That was necessary in the off chance that they'd need to lock the fiddler back up quickly. But today his keyring felt so much heavier. It held the same handful of keys which had unlocked the fiddler's box for years. Nothing about it had changed physically. It was the weight of the key ring's role in tonight's plan that added the extra heft. Forcing his facial muscles into the passive expression of an attendant, he tried out twirling the key ring round his right index finger. Part of him was nervous that the sweat would cause it to go flying across the room. He imagined the judge's head snapping to him, the broadcaster making a comment on the newest appointed attendant's strange behavior. That would ruin everything, and it would be all his fault. Thankfully, the action was perfectly ingrained into his muscles. The keys flew up and over his hand, landing on his thumb and securely anchored to his index finger. No chance of flying out of his grasp. He resisted the urge to twirl them again and again, like he'd gotten accustomed to in the past few months. One of his most clear orders was to twirl his keys, like he always did, but to limit the twirling to once at a time. Until the last moment, that is. He could not risk the signal getting muddied by excess twirling. The reality of Ronald's situation seemed to finally dawn on him, like he was only now waking up from a dream. The fiddler was on stage. The dancers had begun. The undercover agents were scattered throughout the audience. This was real. It was finally happening after years of planning and months of practice. No opportunity left to chicken out now. Any minute now, the red recording light would flash off, then on again, and it would be time. Everyone was relying on him to deliver the signal. Once he did, he'd be relying on them too. The edges of his vision blurred. This job, being an attendant, gave him the air of something brave. Only a courageous person could risk getting so close to the fiddler. He'd allowed himself to believe that was evidence of his own courage. But he was a fraud. Courage was volunteering as a representative of your family to dance in the marathon, or putting everything on the line to stand up to the marathon itself, like the other undercover agents were. Everything Ronald had done up to this point had been so easy. Delivering the signal and playing his part in this rebellious plan, that would be the first time he truly sacrificed anything. He worked to keep the tears from spilling out of his eyes, but he wasn't sure he could. Maybe he was too frightened after all. A dancer within his view caught his attention then. He was tall and lanky, with large, clumsy feet. Ronald's stomach dropped. This dancer had the same build and gait as Martin, his oldest brother. It was uncanny. The dancer was even wearing a mustard yellow shirt, Martin's favorite color. Ronald remembered a sweater in exactly that shade hanging from Martin's closet, meticulously cleaned and kept perfect. He had loved it so dearly. They had decided to bury him in it. As his eyes clouded over with tears, overcome with memories of his late brother, Ronald convinced himself the dancer was truly Martin. Martin, full of joy, dancing from his heart. Spinning around the room without a care about his ungraceful steps, trotting on their mother's toes as he tried to lift her spirits, eliciting raucous laughter from Ronald when he eventually knocked over a lamp or smashed a plate. But as his tears dried and his visions began to clear, Ronald saw the dancer as he truly was. Muscles spasming in an ungodly and terrible manner, not an ounce of joy to be seen. Martin had left this world that way. Not dancing, with a bright smile taking over his face, as they had in the kitchen of their old, tiny family house, Martin had been tortured to death by this disgusting performance, all for some other fucker to walk away victorious. Ronald could never get his brother back, but he could avenge him. When the red light of the recording sign blinked off and then on, Ronald did not panic. The order of the events in the plan had been drilled so perfectly in his head. All he had to do was let muscle memory take over. He kept watching the dancer in the mustard shirt as he raised his right arm high into the air. He forced his eyes out of focus, willing them to see the image of Martin dancing again, and then twirled the key ring round his index finger. Once, twice, 3 times. The signal complete. Ronald had argued when he had first been told what would happen next. It didn't seem fair, not fair at all. But nothing about the marathon was fair. Why was he more entitled to fairness than anyone else in this room? His action, twirling the key ring 3 times, was the signal for all the undercover agents scattered throughout the crowd to quickly yank off their headphones. If the next phase of the plan was to work, then none of them could hear the broadcast that was about to begin. Ronald had simply not wanted to understand why he couldn't remove his headphones too. They needed him to look innocent, is what he'd been told, in case anything went wrong. His position as an attendant was too valuable, they'd said. It made perfect sense, even if Ronald didn't want to believe it at the time. But now, all he wanted was to dance with Martin. It would be his penance to his beloved brother. All it took was a single note of the true fiddler's tune, now broadcasting through Ronald and the audience's headphones, and his muscles were no longer his. The true fiddler, spirited away only hours ago by other comrades in on the rebellious scheme, and replaced with an imposter. The one he had let out of the box. The true fiddler, now hidden away in the recording studio, likely bending the broadcaster to her will as well. The first spasm sent his hips rocking violently forward. A sharp pain burst from his lower back, and he wanted to cry out, but his muscles wouldn't allow even that. His body kept moving, uncaring that every twist, turn, and fling made the pain in his back double. Martin had lasted 23 days of the dance marathon. Would Ronald only last 2 minutes? How pathetic. He could barely see anything as his body was taken over by the fiddle's influence. Erratic movement from the stands indicated that the rest of the audience was ensnared by the true fiddler's tune as well, which meant things were going to plan. Ronald tried to feel happy about that, but his heart merely sunk further into itself. Martin had experienced this. Martin had died like this. This was too much for Ronald to handle. A blur of mustard yellow flashed past him, moving with a direct speed Ronald could not imagine possible under the fiddle's influence. A glimmer of hope sparked in his chest as he held on to the image of the mustard-clad dancer running by. The dancers would run away first. He'd known that was the plan. After he gave the signal, the impersonator, pretending to be the fiddler who he'd released from the box, would stop playing and the dancers would run. They'd never been truly under the fiddle's spell. They had full control over every one of their movements, which meant they could run, and they'd need to, as they'd be the first punished if anything went wrong. That part of the plan, at the very least, was a success. The dancers all escaped. They wouldn't be able to return home. They'd have to flee far from the dance marathon's grasp. But considering that, if it had been a standard marathon, all but one of them would have been dead, this was a much better outcome. Ronald could not force his face to smile, but he felt happiness burning in his cheeks. It felt as though the escaping dancer in the mustard shirt was Martin, finally free. Martin's spirit finally untethered from the cursed sound of the fiddle, able to rest at long last. Ronald's part in this rebellion was done. Now it was the undercover agent's turn. Maybe they'd save him by finally liberating the fiddler. Maybe he'd die from a broken back before they could. Either way, Martin was finally free, and Ronald was grateful. That was Half-Baked Tale number 43, Fiddling, Part 3. I've never written a Part 3 of any Half-Baked Tale before. Even the 2-part stories that I've written for the podcast could more or less stand on their own, but Fiddling is different. It really flows from one chapter to the next. I just kept imagining what was going to happen next. I couldn't stop myself. And that is one of the missions of the Half-Baked Tale podcast. I write the story that my brain latches onto that week. All week long, I think through what the next story is going to be. What is jumping out in my mind? What do I keep revisiting? I stop myself from overthinking, deciding if something is good or not, and I just follow my imagination. It encourages me, this practice, it encourages me to keep my eyes and my ears open constantly. You know, what are the people at the bus stop doing? Is there an interesting sticker on a lamppost? Does a mysterious person come knocking at your neighbor's door in the night? Is there an interesting cluster of bird feeders on the building you walk by? You know, every step you take outside every day, it exposes you to a new story thread, and they're really endless. And keeping my mind working to find them means keeping my imagination unbridled. So when my brain is stuck on a dance marathon story with a terrible name, I really hate the name, I've talked about it in the last few podcasts, I go with it. Now, I am currently presented with a bit more of a challenge in keeping listeners up to speed, but I've met that challenge by writing synopses in the introductions, and that's a skill all on its own. It is so difficult to condense your ideas into a few sentences which both entice and prepare the reader. I spent a good deal of time narrowing down the few absolutely necessary plot points needed to support Ronald's story. This is not a new struggle. The elevator pitch is a notoriously difficult thing to nail. I really enjoyed writing about Ronald, though I didn't intend to write about him at all, which brings us back to what I was saying before. Writing this podcast each week requires an unbridled imagination. I intended to tell the next part of the story from Deli, the original character, that is in Fiddling Part 1 and 2. I intended it to be from Deli's point of view. It made the most sense. It kept a consistent character thread, made it easier for the new podcast listeners to tune in, and it rounded out Deli's arc. It just made the most sense to write it that way. But my imagination kept pulling me to other characters, other elements of the marathon that Deli just wouldn't know about, elements of the rebellious plan. I just wasn't curious about Deli's experience. If I was a writer on a deadline, I would have had to push through and finish that arc, but that's not what this podcast is. I don't have to do that. The only thing I have to do is write a story each week. And like I said, in order to make sure I get that done, I gotta leave my imagination unbridled. So, when I started writing this week, my fingers basically found their way to Ronald on their own. You can even see it from the first sentence. It's, the signal would come from the third of the fiddler's attendants. I was really trying to pick up right where I left off with the character at the end of Fiddling Part 2 who was waiting for that signal to put their whole plan into motion. I had a hard time writing from there because I was trying to make myself write something very specific, but that's not what Half-Baked Tales is, and I'm so much happier with this additional character that I got to explore. I even want to expand on him now, start his story earlier so we can get to know Martin and experience how it felt when Martin signed himself up for the marathon. When I follow my imagination, I get excited to keep going further, and that's better than a polished product, in my opinion. I also just wanted to very quickly touch on the film They Shoot Horses, Don't They? Starring Jane Fonda and some other brilliant actors. It takes place in one of those dance marathons from the 1930s and depicts it as being as awful as you can possibly imagine. I'll likely have a lot more time to go into it next week, but it's available on YouTube and I highly recommend. If you enjoy these stories and this chat, please like, comment, follow, or review on whatever platform you listen on. Half-Baked Tales is currently available on Substack, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. And in this early stage, the goal is to reach new people and find my audience. Particularly, if you have Substack, please follow me at Half-Baked Tales. Engaging with the podcast helps other people see it, but better than manipulating the algorithm is word of mouth recommendation. So if you know someone who loves a short story, who needs to do some more reading, or who just loves a bit of talk about imagination, please send them my way. As ever, thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you next week.